So today I'm actually happy that last speaker just spoke about history and failing to mention really important things in history, especially in our public school system. Today I have with me Gary Gibson, also known as Gifted Anomaly. He is a rapper, performer, and he's going to help me perform some of the freethinkers, some of the works, I should say, from some of the people that I will be speaking about today. So today, again, I'm going to be speaking about the Harlem Renaissance and Black freethinkers. This is my outline. It's probably more for me than for you, so I don't go off on too much of a tangent. But I'm going to describe the Harlem Renaissance, what is it, the history of Harlem itself, and then I'm going to discuss, I have three freethinkers that I'm going to highlight during this movement. So the Harlem Renaissance was many different things to different people. If you ask 5 different people exactly what it was and what it accomplished, you'll get 5 different answers, which is pretty common, I think, when you have a movement. I define it as the focal point for African Americans to express their views through their art. It started more or less around the 1920s. It lasted for about 2 decades. To those that actually participated in it, it was known as the New Negro Renaissance or the Negro Renaissance. And like, again, with most movements, there's not an actual date that you can say, okay, this is what started the movement. Just like the atheist movement. I mean, some would argue that we're not even in the movement yet. So there's no particular date, but there are certain events that we can point to. And one of the earliest events was this dinner thrown by Charles Johnson. And this was a dinner to highlight African American writers. One of the reasons it was so instrumental is that this happened in March, I believe, March 21, 1924. And it was a dinner that brought together over 100 people, many of whom were African American writers. And though they were well known, they were kind of known in isolation, just a bunch of writers. And this was the first time that it was identified as a movement. The other big thing about this dinner was the fact that it had white publishers. And similar to today, most of the major publishing companies are white owned. And although a lot of the writers had audiences, particularly in Harlem, they were well known. They weren't well known outside of that community. And so being able to connect and network with some of these publishers was instrumental in moving them forward and giving them a larger audience. The country itself was in political turmoil. We had just concluded the war to end all wars. We see how well that went. Specifically, African Americans in the South were basically in a very hostile environment. The political structure that was in place encouraged discrimination and encouraged white mob violence, and there wasn't, there weren't many jobs available to African Americans. Many were sharecroppers, and there was widespread crop failure. So we were struggling, and it was just very hard for many blacks in the South. And so they wanted to escape, and there was a lot of talk, if you will, about Harlem having, this wonderful environment where, black intellectuals were able to, prosper. And so there was a large movement to the north from the south. It became known as the Great Migration. And between 1916 to 1918, there were over 400,000 blacks that moved from the south to the north, about 16,000 a month and about 500 people a day. At the same time, we had Prohibition around this time. That was in effect. And people were still looking for ways to, generally speaking, the country was looking for ways to entertain themselves. And so Harlem actually was a wonderful place to bring together a lot of different people that I guess during the week or during the day that don't normally communicate with each other. In particular, they had this area called Jungle Alley, which had this motto of like, come one, come all. It's where your middle class blacks would go, your poor whites would hang out, your bootleggers, your drug dealers, prostitutes. Just if you wanted to experience the arts and music, this was a place that has so much diversity. And it was a place that drew together so many different types of individuals to one place. Harlem itself was going through a bit of economic changes. In the 1870s, it was an area that was built for your 1%, if you will, your very affluent whites. And basically they overbuilt. It was a huge bubble that burst at the turn of the century, and for the homeowners, they were forced to sell their homes well below cost. For the landlords that were renting out in this area, they were forced to again sell their property well below cost because they couldn't find people to rent to, basically. A lot of the homes were subdivided, and again, there were just a lot of vacancies. And so Philip A. Payton was the founder of the Afro-American Realty Company, and he was instrumental in basically moving Harlem from a predominantly white area to a predominantly black area. During this time, a lot of landlords would not rent to blacks, and he became the liaison between black, I guess, to-be tenants and then white landlords. And his company basically, again, turned Harlem from a predominantly white area to a predominantly black area. Harlem, during this time, was expanding both in population and in size. Between 1920 to 1930, the population itself had increased from 73,000 blacks to 164,000 blacks. It had expanded again in actual radius. It had expanded about 10 blocks out. And again, it was an area with so many different people felt welcome because they could, be themselves, if you will. There was, as is with every movement, a divide between the veterans and the newcomers. And so the veterans, like Du Bois and Locke, felt that we should not be, that the work that we are putting out, if you will, the work that our art should not be focusing on any negative stereotypes that are already associated with blacks. So they didn't want to talk about the poverty. They didn't want to talk about a lot of the social injustices that African Americans were facing. They wanted to highlight the positive aspects of blacks and the black community, focusing particularly on intellectualism in the African American community. They basically were tired of having all these negative stereotypes associated with African Americans. On the flip side, you had people like Hughes and Hurston who said, no, 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 we need to talk about these things. These are things that affect our community, from overcrowding to racial prejudice to poverty, and that artists should not be limited on what they speak about. This was highlighted in Hughes, Langston Hughes' essay entitled The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain, and that was published in June 1926. So during the Harlem Renaissance, these were issues that that members of the community were facing. The working class pretty much didn't exist. A lot of the retail shops were white-owned. This is particularly important because although you had a lot of black intellectuals with PhDs, they were sweeping floors they weren't what people thought they were. You can call them, doctor, whoever, but you know, they're doing these menial jobs because they didn't own a lot of companies in Harlem, and unemployment was still high, contrary to the reputation that Harlem had taken on in other areas. The housing was low quality. You had landlords who refused to abide by housing codes because, you know, their tenants are black, and, you know, they can care less, basically, about complying with the requirements that they were supposed to comply with by law. By the 1930s, approximately 30% of the housing facilities in Harlem lacked adequate bathing facilities. And this is not, I mean, we're talking the 1930s. It's unheard, it should have been unheard of for apartments that not have adequate bathing facilities during this time. Conditions were so bad that we had that there were so-called rent parties, and these were parties where you would invite your friends to come over for a cost. You would hire entertainment, and you would cook food. And your goal was obviously to cover the cost, but more importantly to cover your rent during that during the party. And so, you know, this was one of the creative things that came out of the poor living situation in Harlem. And what was most disappointing is that so many of these, so many members of the black community had migrated from the South to the North because of this reputation. They had relocated their family only to discover that they were facing the same discrimination, the same issues that they were facing in the South. And so, you know, the black church, basically it's the moment, right? Sorry. That's what I was thinking in my head, and it didn't come out well. The black church decided that, you know, this was a great opportunity. You know, the church is infamous for preying on social injustices and finding, you know, creating opportunities for people. And they were instrumental, I won't take that away, they were instrumental in helping to improve the black community, particularly during this time. One of the largest church rather, was the Abyssinian Baptist Church. It was certainly the most influential political black congregation in New York City, sorry. It was started by Ethiopians and African Americans as a response to racial segregation in the First Baptist Church of New York City. So I don't know if you guys, if everyone's like familiar with the churches in the North, but though some of the churches would welcome African Americans to the service, we were required to either sit in the back or up in the balcony. So we weren't really able to participate, if you will, you know, weren't really able to experience the same way as whites. And so they created this church out of frustration, and they didn't want to deal with the discrimination anymore, and so this church came out of that. It was led originally by Adam Clayton Powell and later by his son, Adam Clayton Powell Jr. And this church faced a lot of issues in attracting members from the South and from the Caribbean islands, because they had migrated from the South to the North again, but a lot of the churches in the South at that time were not these mega churches. They were not these huge churches. They had this very communal feeling, you know, people were coming together, very small churches, and these large churches like Abyssinian Baptist Church were intimidating. And so the way that they were able to attract the members were through social services. So they were filling that gap. They were providing housing, adequate housing. They were providing health care. They were providing general community services such as child care or daycare, food stamps. They would help with you know, getting certain government services or helping them fill out applications, if you will, so that they can obtain whatever benefits were available to them through the government. They would kind of walk them through the process. And because of this, the congregation grew. They had a congregation of about 1,600 members in 1908 when Adam Clayton Sr. led the church. And by 1937, they had over 10,000 people as members of the church. It was known as the catalyst for a change in the African American community. And that is a more recent picture of it, although I couldn't find a good picture. I said I was going to take my own, but I never did. But it's a huge, huge church. It's still very influential today. The second largest church was the Salem Methodist Church. It was headed by Frederick Cullen. They also offered a number of social services. Again, that's why they were very successful in their endeavors. And they promoted this idea of nurturing the whole person. I highlighted this because I found their marketing technique interesting. They used to engage, Frederick Cullen used to engage children by, he was very energetic and used to play with the kids in the neighborhood, and so the kids would get really excited about him, and then they would convince the parents, hey, we got to go to the church because Cullen is so awesome. And that was one of the big marketing techniques that he used to get families to the church. And again, it was the second largest congregation in Harlem at that time. This is an older picture. And again, it's not a great picture, but it's what Google had to offer. County Cullen was his son. He was a poet. He was very, very well educated. He went to DeWitt Clinton High School, which was rated at that time as one of the top high schools in the city. He went to NYU for undergrad and graduated from Harvard with an MA in English and French. He was what was coined as the talented 10. So he was very well educated. Talented 10th is a term that was coined by W.E.B. Du Bois. And he was one of the most educated African Americans or known African Americans of that time. Despite his upbringing very early in his career, he wanted to explore the inconsistencies in religious faith and racism. In his work Heritage, he delves into this issue of double consciousness as defined by W.E.B. Du Bois, but he labels it two-ness. So a double consciousness, it's this issue of African Americans identifying as Americans, however, being rejected from the same society. So you want to identify as black, and you also want to identify as American, but these two things seem to be inconsistent with each other, and it causes serious issues to the psyche, particularly during this time. And W.E.B. Du Bois originally coined it as a double consciousness, and then County Cullen went into it, renaming it the two-ness, and also explored it in his works. So he explores it in this poem, Heritage, through the eyes. He takes you kind of on this journey through the protagonist is a young, educated African-American boy who is told that African cultures are pagan. They were savages in Africa. There's nothing positive about any of the cultures in the whole continent of Africa. It was just horrible. Everything was horrible, and he should be grateful, basically, that he's now black in America. And the protagonist says, no, I don't believe that. He rejected that and said, I believe that there are many beautiful cultures in Africa. That he painted it as its beautiful promised land. One of the other things that he explored in this was that Jesus was a black man, which maybe today is not as shocking, but this was the first time, to my knowledge, that this was actually publicly stated. And of course, it had so much controversy around this issue because we all know that he was blue-eyed and blonde hair. And so it's a big issue. He wrote a number of poems, again, probably because of his upbringing. He wrote a lot about Christianity, and part of it, you can see in his writings that he's really, you can see that he takes you on his own journey of these inconsistencies. And one of his most famous works is entitled The Pagan Prayer. And again, he's noting that, blacks pray all the time, and yet our prayers seem to be ignored. We're still living in despair. Our communities are still, heavily impoverished. We're, poor education. It's just not a positive place to be. And yet, you know, every time we pray to God, I'm not really seeing any change. And so he had taken issue with that. So I'm going to have Gary perform his poem, Pagan Prayer, an excerpt from the poem.
Pagan Prayer. Not for myself, I make this prayer, but for this race of mine that stretches forth, shadow places, dark hands from bread and wine. For me, my pagan heart is mad, my feet are never still, but give them hearths to keep them warm in homes on a high hill. Our Father, God, or Brother Christ, or are we bastard kin? That till our plaints your ears are cold, your doors barred from within? Our Father, God, or Brother Christ, retrieve my race again. So shall you compass this black sheep, this pagan heart? Amen.
Again, I keep hitting this point because you'll see it throughout the speech, but with other artists. But again, he just constantly struggled with the idea of this good God and with social injustice. And he ultimately comes to the decision that every lynching is representative of the struggles that Christ, you know, went through. It was the only way that I believe that he was able to reconcile the two. The next person I'm going to talk about is Claude Mckay. He was a Jamaican poet. Again, he often wrote about racial inequality. One of the reasons I like to highlight him is because he wrote in a Jamaican dialect. He was first discovered in Jamaica. However, he moved to America in 1912 to attend Tuskegee and also to expand his audience. And then he moved to Harlem in 1914 again to further expand his audience and to explore his works. He was taught when he grew up that to accept a very literal interpretation of the Bible during childhood. And this disturbed him to no end because he was forever cursed, as all black people are, of course, if you take a more literal understanding of the Bible. And he just didn't like that it did not allow for change. And he started to move away from institutionalized racism, and he was once quoted as saying that he never had any faith in revealed religion. He was introduced, he says that he was introduced, I don't know, I'm guessing he was studying or something, to evolution at some point in his life. And he embraced it immediately because it was one of the things that he always talked about. It allowed for change. And although he was introduced to it from a biological standpoint, he was able to see it as far as, he was able to see evolution within a society. For instance, blacks were no longer enslaved at this time. And so it went against everything that he had learned as a Christian, but it also was something that was easily understandable, and it just simply made sense. It made so much more sense than him being punished for something that he had no control over long before he was ever born. And he wanted to see, like all of the artists that I speak about today, he really truly wanted to see a social evolution. He wanted to see discrimination done away with. He wanted to see our communities doing better. He created a fictional character named Cujo, which was short for Cousin Joe, to discuss evolution in his works. I like the fact that he used Cujo. It's very interesting to me that he chose to use an illiterate. Cujo is illiterate, he's poorly educated, but even he's able to understand evolution. And I think that's what he was trying to get across, that evolution makes so much sense that even your least educated can understand it. So Gary's going to perform Cujo, fresh from the lecture, by Claude Mckay, an excerpt from it, rather.
Any Jamaicans out there, please forgive me. This man tell us straight about the whole thing. Come and show us without a doubt how God was not to blame, how change caused everything to mix upon the earth, and that most had come to accident of birth.
Langston Hughes was a writer, a poet, he wrote plays, he was an essayist, he did it all. He also struggled with this idea of a good God and inequality. In his work, Salvation, he talks about how he got saved. And it's a very interesting, you're doing this part, right? It's a very interesting, I like the poem. It's comical and it's emotional. So this is a poem where, or it's an essay rather, about his childhood. And I don't know how many of you have ever been to the Black church, but it's a very, very, very energetic and high-spirited experience every Sunday. And so his aunt, he goes to church with his aunt, and his aunt tells him, look, you need to be saved, you know, and you'll know when you're saved because Jesus will reveal himself. And so he takes this literally, he's a young child. And so they have all the kids, he describes in the essay that they have all the kids on the bench, and one by one they're going up. And he's still waiting for Jesus to reveal himself. And he's talking to his friend, and his friend is like, man, I don't know, you know? And at the end of this, you know, the people are clapping every time a child comes up, and again, it's very energetic. And so it's just him and his friend on the bench left. And his friend says, man, screw this. He goes up there, and Langston's scared for him. He's like, no, you know, don't do that. You know, God's going to strike you down. And when his friend doesn't get struck down, he's like, all right, you know what, maybe I can do this. And so he goes up, and his aunt like falls out, and you know, the entire church is like, yay, because all the children are done. It's very late at night, you know, everyone's exhausted. And that is Salvation. At the very end, he's talking about what happened when he got home with his aunt. And Gary's going to do the last part of the essay when he gets home. Okay, sorry, Gary's not going to do that part. So I'll just tell you about it. I thought I had it down. Okay, okay. Just give me, you know what, I'll just tell you about it. I would have read it, but it's a very sad part at the end because he's crying at night. And so his aunt is like, you know, telling, I guess, I think it's the uncle, I'm not sure, but someone else in the household, oh man, Langston's crying because, you know, he found the Lord and blah, blah, blah. And he was crying because he felt like he had betrayed his aunt at the end. So that's the end of the poem Salvation, or the essay Salvation, rather. And I think that's, because it's a story about himself, I think that was a great way for him to talk about his own experiences and struggles with religion. So he has another poem, which Gary will be performing. It's called Who But the Lord, and again it talks about the struggles that he faced with regard to inequality and this good God. And Langston Hughes was one that always pushed the envelope. And so this was a great piece by him. It's called
I looked and I saw that man they call law. He was coming down the street at me. I had visions in my head of being laid out cold and dead, or else murdered by the third degree. I said, oh Lord, if you can, save me from that man. Don't let him make a pope out of me. But the Lord, he was not quick. The Lord raised up his stick and beat the living hell out of me. Now, I do not understand why God don't protect a man from police brutality. Being poor and black, I have no weapon to strike back, so who but the Lord can protect me?
I'm curious, you talked about that in the black community is a tremendous amount of religiosity. Do you get, as a black atheist, what kind of reactions do you get from peers, from friends, from people in your community?
Family. My family's dysfunctional, so, you know, everyone's something. We're always arguing about, I mean, I got, you know, pastors and bishops and Muslims and Jehovah's Witnesses, so no one agrees. So when I'm the atheist, I'm just another quirky family member. So the family is fine. Friends, I've lost a couple, but I don't look at it as a bad thing. I know, like, in romantic relationships, people seem to understand that people can outgrow relationships, and I believe that's true also for friendships. And so I think that for those friends that I've lost, I basically just outgrew the friendship. As far as random people, I seem to get polarized reviews. Like, it's either like, oh my gosh, you're another black atheist, I'm so glad to meet you, or it's like, you're going to hell, I hate you, and you're going to die. So that's the reaction that I get. And my friends are accepting. But I kind of, I mean, I know most of them for a long time. When I first became, or first realized I was an atheist, which was long after I became an atheist, I was semi-out, so anyone new I met, I was like, oh yeah, I'm an atheist, just so I didn't have to deal with it. And then my older friends, I kind of like, I think I made a Facebook post about it or something, and they were like, oh yeah, well, we knew you were wrong.
I love the historical connection, and I hope that does resonate within the black community. What about modern contemporary freethinkers and atheists in the black community? Do you find that can resonate as well?
Yeah, come to another one of my speeches. I have another speech where I talk about contemporary individuals, Sikibu Hutchinson, or Dr. Sikibu Hutchinson, in California. I talk about Jamila Bay, myself. Dr. Anthony Penn. I mean, Norm Allen. I mean, there's a lot, but you know, not for the speech, not for the Harlem Renaissance.
Could you comment briefly on all of the national organizations, and I don't mean to name them, but what should they be doing to do a better job of reaching out to the African American community across the whole country?
Yeah, relevance. I mean, I think I was at TAM 2 years ago, and there was a panel discussion about this. And Jamila Bay said something along the lines of, you know, I don't care about, you know, someone's religion necessarily when my child is going to get shot, you know, because of police brutality issues in the community. You can't, you have to stay relevant. And this is just basic marketing, you know. AARP does not market itself to teenagers. There's a reason that they don't market themselves to teenagers. They have a particular market. And so if you want to reach out to the black community or any community, you have to know the issues within that community and talk to people within that community to say, you know, what is it that you want? I know for us, we are, oh, shameless plug, I have my flyers. We do, I'm very, very big on education. I just think that, not to sound like a jerk, but I think I would waste my efforts on trying to talk to adults that aren't already atheists. And so my goal is not to turn kids into atheists, but to improve critical thinking. And that can't be done when you have schools that, you know, aren't willing to purchase adequate supplies for students. So we have a program called Science Cubed, where we donate supplies to schools in need. Right now we're focusing on schools that have been affected by Hurricane Sandy. The most recent school that we donated to was a school where some astronomically high, like 1/3 of the population, 1/3 of the student body is homeless. And these kids are just trying to get to college. And so we donated supplies. We donate supplies specifically to the science program. But they're homeless because of Hurricane Sandy, and I know it happened, you know, 2 years, 2.5, 3 years ago. Where am I off of? It happened not too long ago, but you know, they weren't able to rebuild, you know, especially if they didn't own it. I mean, if they're renting in Queens, you know, they just haven't been able to. These kids are bouncing around from shelter to shelter, and they're just trying to get, you know, stabilized so that they can get to college. That's their next goal. And so, for me, that's a big issue, just improving education in the black community. You can look at healthcare, you can look at police brutality issues, you can look at a lot of issues that we have in the community. I guess it all kind of boils down to institutionalized racism. But there are just so many different areas that you can focus on, and just showing that you care about the community is how you reach out to any community. Yes?
Thanks for coming and doing this presentation. I really feel like I'm going to walk away from this conference knowing more than when I went in, which is always a plus.
Yes, education.
Going back to the history, you had mentioned that there is this aspect of come one, come all to the Renaissance. And I'm wondering, I'm really curious as to what you think sparked that particular reaction as opposed to being, becoming an insular community, which they would be more than justified in reacting that way.
I don't know. I don't know. I kind of, huh?
We should model that.
Yeah, we should. I don't know. I think it was just one of those weird situations where because the economy had collapsed, because you still had these affluent whites that were leaving. I think I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't know what attracted the village, if you know, in New York, to so many different, you know, cultures. It was where the freaks went, as my dad says, and he was one of them. You know, he was a hippie slash what does he call himself? A hippie slash God, I can't think of the word. Like pro-black, inconsistent piece, but yeah, a militant black, all at the same time. You know. But the village was where these people met. It was just the perky people of society. So I don't know. Yes.
Yes. I'm curious. What do you think about this notion that regarding the early history of Black freethinkers, that although there were many key figures who were very critical of organized religion, like Frederick Douglass, for example, some of the ones you talked about, but yet they didn't explicitly identify as atheists, and they didn't ever explicitly say that they didn't believe in God. This notion that, you know, I guess as taboo as it was to be critical of organized religion, it was especially among the Black community, then, well, presumably now as well, that much more taboo to actually explicitly say that you're an atheist. But I've heard the idea that yet in the writings of several of these figures you can find the hints that they kind of had to talk in kind of thin, veiled language or coded language to kind of convey that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there are a couple of issues. Number one is definition. The definition of the word. I think atheism has evolved as far as the definition of the word itself. I know for me, not that I had a correct definition, but when I became an atheist, I didn't know I was an atheist because I thought an atheist was a devil worshiper, and I didn't worship the devil. So, you know, it took a while for me to figure out that I was actually an atheist. So I think that may be an issue. Just a proper definition or a commonly accepted, I guess proper would be improper, but a common definition, an agreed upon definition. I don't necessarily think, like Langston Hughes, I don't think he was a non-Christian. I don't know, I think he kind of created his own religion, if you will. There were atheists, who was it? A. Philip Randolph was an atheist. Arguably, Bayard Rustin was a Quaker. I don't know what that was. Hubert Harrison, that's what I was thinking of. Hubert Harrison was an out and out atheist. And so they were there without the coded language, if you will. But the reason why I use freethinker is because I don't necessarily know. And I don't want to force a title on them that may be inappropriate. Plus, there's always some expert in the audience that knows what I'm doing.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
And I want to comment on the MLK presentations this year. They were way, way, way different than any other MLK presentations I've seen. Much more diversity, and Jamila Bay was just excellent. And Myrtle Evers Williams came out strong, and many others. What I noticed was that more young people had a strong, positive view without the God concept. Because in the DC area, my impression is the God concept is so strong, it is like the churches are lined up on 16th Street, and it's like, if you don't do the God concept thing, you are like to say, it's as bad as the Salem witches were in Salem, Mass. How do you have a suggestion, somebody that you really felt came on strong? Like Joy Reid, she comes on strong on the network, but how do you get over the God concept from a community and commercial standpoint?
I think it's always going to be having more people that are out there that are saying, I'm an atheist, I'm normal, you know, having other people look at you and see that you're like them, that you're not some weird, you know, person living in the woods by yourself with no electricity or something like that. The funny thing is, not that it's that relevant to what you just said, DC. When I first became a nonprofit, I had to go to DC to a Wachovia bank in DC, and I needed something notarized. And Wachovia was giving me the biggest. I had opened my account with them, and I had to go to them to get something notarized for the BAAm. And the lady wouldn't notarize it because she's like, she didn't know what an atheist was first. And then when her boss told her what it was, she was like, oh, yo, I can't. And then her boss had to notarize it. And he was, I mean, you could see like. He was uncomfortable, but I mean, he was also the branch manager. I had to throw my attorney card out, so it got notarized, just saying, but I had to do some work to get it notarized in DC. And I mean, DC to me is more, it's similar to New York, but I didn't face that same kind of just crazy resistance. I mean, they may talk about me when I leave, but I mean, they didn't notarize it, it was crazy. So anyway, just my little tidbit about DC.
Yeah.
Very religious.
I have lots of questions, but I'll limit it to one. This is going off of what you said about your education drive, or the Science
Cubed, yes. Did not have flyers.
My group does a very similar thing in Worcester, but we only go to, we work with the food bank, or the food pantry, local to where we meet. Do you deal directly with the schools? And when you do, are you, how do you connect yourself, how do you connect the community with the fact that the supplies are coming from your group, or do you? Do you even bother?
No, I do because it's important, again,
Right.
for marketing. I faced a lot of resistance in New York. It wasn't until this year that I was able to even get my supplies in New York, oddly enough. So I met atheists, basically. We donated supplies. The first time we donated supplies was in California, then Hawaii, then I had a teacher in Texas that contacted me, but we haven't been able to donate to her yet. It was the issue of creationism being taught alongside. And I just want to make sure, I mean, I don't know what you get for creationism. I just want to make sure that, you know, we donate the actual supplies, so it's not an issue of, I don't know what creationism is. Other than a book that says that everything science is wrong. Florida, Tennessee, I mean, so I have teachers that are atheists that are struggling because one of the issues with the Texas was that she was forced to teach creationism. So I tell them, and they're atheists, and they accept the supplies and write thank you letters, and I haven't gotten any parents that were totally upset. I guess they see their schools are in such dismay that they're just happy to see supplies. My schools are really, I mean, we define schools in need. My organization is 40% or more on poverty, or at the poverty level. And most of my schools, I mean, they meet it flying colors. I mean, 80–90% of them are living at the poverty level. Yes?
Ms. Watson, thank you for your presentation.
Thanks.
And I was wondering, in what areas of the country have you seen a rise in Black atheists?
Me, New York, DC, Atlanta, Houston, Chicago, like major cities, I guess. LA, yeah. It's usually where my colleagues are. They're throwing a mess, so.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question.
I'm from the Midwest. I want to ask, where is Harlem today? How would you describe it? Is the Renaissance still going on? Obviously not, but what happened?
died down. Harlem is still fun. It's still predominantly black. But you know what? I still see it. I mean, we have CFI still has meetings in Harlem because it's a place where you can have meetings in the black community, which I think is so important. Oftentimes you see a lot of these atheist events that are outside the black community, and I want to be able to bring it to the black community. So Harlem is one of the places where we've been successful. People are willing to rent, even religious entities are willing to rent to atheist organizations. I don't know if they're struggling for money or they just are more welcoming, I don't know. But it's not what it used to be. It's not, you don't see as much art and as much appreciation for art. I think that's just generally. But certainly it is a more diverse culture. It's going through gentrification. It's good and bad, I guess. So, thank you.